Welcome to episode 59 of the Eat for Endurance podcast. My name is Claire Shorenstein, and I am a board-certified sports dietitian and runner based in Santa Cruz, California. I provide virtual nutrition services to teenage and adult athletes of all abilities, and I host this podcast as a fun side project to demonstrate that there is no one-size-fits-all nutrition approach towards optimal health and sports performance. I do this primarily through my nutrition profiles featuring high-performing athletes, as well as interviews with my dietitian colleagues on various sports nutrition topics, with the occasional solo episode and other interviews thrown in. Today, I am welcoming fellow dietitian Jill Merkel onto the show. Jill is an anti-diet, weight-inclusive registered dietitian and certified intuitive eating counselor. Jill has worked in a variety of collegiate sports settings and was the team sports dietitian for the NFL Tennessee Titans for 5 seasons, from 2017 to 21. She now has a private practice specializing in body image, chronic dieting, disordered eating, and sports nutrition. Jill is passionate about intuitive eating and anti-diet nutrition for athletes, which is our main topic for today. I haven't done an episode on intuitive eating for athletes since my very first RD interview with Heather Kaplan back in August of 2019. It's a great episode if you'd like to check it out. I think it was number 2. Thus, it was definitely time to revisit this important topic. So without further ado, please enjoy my discussion with dietitian Jill Merkel on intuitive eating and anti-diet nutrition for athletes. Jill, welcome to the Eat for Endurance podcast. How's everything going today?
It's going well. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, and I saw that you're a runner. Did you run today at all, or are you training for anything in particular?
I did not run today. I'm going to do a short strength workout later this evening. I have a 10K race coming up this Saturday, and I had a weird leg pain happen this past weekend, so I'm kind of trying to take it a little easy this week. And then my big goal for this year is that I'm going to run the New York City Marathon in November for charity. And that will only be my second full marathon. And that will be almost exactly 10 years from my first full marathon. So that's
exciting. What was your first marathon?
My first was the Portland, Oregon Marathon back in October of 2013.
Ooh, I did that one in... I think it was October of 2011. That's a fun one too.
Yeah. I was in grad school at the time out in Utah, and I don't know why I was looking between Portland and Denver, and I was like, well, I want to go up in elevation for my first marathon, so I chose Portland.
Awesome. Well, you're in for a treat for New York City. I lived out there for a long time, and it's such an amazing race. You're going to have the best time.
Yes, I'm so excited.
Awesome. All right. Well, before we dive into today's topic, I'd love for you to share all about your background as a runner, which we got a little bit just now, as a dietitian, and as a certified intuitive eating counselor.
Yes, so the running and the becoming a dietitian kind of went hand in hand. My first undergrad degree was in psychology, and I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life or with that degree. So after I had that degree, I just was working like in a psych office, in the front office. I was working catering. Like I just didn't know what I was doing with my life really. And it was when I started running in the fall of 2009 that I just naturally made some nutrition changes. Like I just made a couple of small changes, just like, oh, I wonder how it would feel if I did this, and like my running improved. Like I felt better. I was like, maybe there's something to this nutrition thing. So decided to go back to school to become a dietitian. So my running wise, my first race was in the spring of 2010. It was a random distance of a 7K. I think that's the only 7K I've ever run. And it's still my fastest race ever. I think I had no idea what I was doing. And I was just, I'm running. Everyone else around me is running. So I'm just going to keep up with them. Really had no strategy going into it. And I think that was a good and a bad thing. Now mentally I'm like, whoa, I can't believe I ever ran that fast. Like it's just never happened since. But I also started with IT band syndrome after that race. So it was probably a little too much too soon. But now I have run 17 half marathons, 1 full marathon, and almost 100 races total, including running in 29 states. So I have a goal to run a race in every state. I'm not doing a certain distance, like a half marathon in every state, but just any race. And so Just got my 29th state back in December. My next one is scheduled for May, and that's a fun goal because I love to travel and I love to run. So fun way to combine those two. And so I went
Awesome.
back to school for nutrition in 2010. And so I did another 2-year bachelor degree in nutrition. And then I'm from Indiana. So I went back to school in Indiana. And then I moved out to Salt Lake City, Utah, and did their coordinated master's program. So that was a 2-year program that combined the master's degree and the internship requirements to become a dietitian. And I chose that program because at the time, and I still think there's not a ton still today that have like an emphasis in sports nutrition. And that was one of the few programs that did. So I was able to work with the collegiate sports dietitian there at the college, working with all of the student athletes my whole second year of that program. And so graduated, got my RD in 2014, have worked ever since, worked in collegiate athletics at different universities. I worked for Exos, which is an athlete's performance training facility. And so we trained athletes of all ages, got my certified specialty in sports dietetics, my CSSD credential. And then I moved to Nashville, Tennessee in 2016. Started my private practice where I work with individuals, both from an athlete, sports nutrition perspective, and then also the intuitive eating, women's wellness, underfueling, body image, chronic dieting, disordered eating type stuff. And then also I was the sports dietitian for the Tennessee Titans for 5 seasons while I was in Nashville. So doing that part-time with my private practice. And now I do my private practice full-time, but I also recently started consulting with the university here in Clarksville, Tennessee. So I'm their first sports dietitian working with their athletes part-time. So I just love to do a variety of things. I'm not great with doing like Groundhog's Day, like the same thing every day. So I love private practice. I love being able to do one-on-one client sessions, but also writing and creating content and consulting and just doing a variety of things.
Awesome. And what inspired you to become, or what motivated you to become the certified intuitive eating counselor?
Yeah, so I feel like that started when I started my private practice. Like I was getting a lot of sports nutrition clients, especially females that were coming to me for sports nutrition, but it was very clear there was other stuff going on, like a lot of underfueling, chronic dieting, disordered eating. And I was like, you're coming to me for sports nutrition, but there's these other things we need to cover first. And really through that experience, I started getting more training, online trainings, reading books, listening to podcasts like on disordered eating and eating disorders and like how to, counsel those people and help those people. And that's really when I found like anti-diet approach and intuitive eating and really started to dive into all of that. And it was really great because for me, it kind of combined like, my psychology degree and my love of like figuring out why people are the way that they are with the food and nutrition piece. So actually in 2020 with the pandemic, since I was just doing everything virtually, was at home a lot that year. That's when I studied and did all the requirements for the intuitive eating certification. So I got that certification in December of 2020.
Can you actually outline what the certification is? Like, what do people have to do in order to be certified? Because I know like dietitians and non-dietitians have that certification, correct?
Yes. Yeah. You don't have to be a dietitian. Any kind of like health professional. I think there are maybe some criteria to be. There's either a certified intuitive eating counselor or there's another one that's more for like lay people, they call it. But it, involved group supervision with Evelyn Tribole or Elise Resch. Those are the two authors of Intuitive Eating. So I did group supervision calls with Evelyn. I had to study and take the online exam. There was like audio recordings I had to listen to. And there might have been a fourth piece. I think there were like 4 different components that I had to do. So just kind of did it over the course of that year, just kind of spread it out from a financial standpoint.
Okay, got it. And that really segues well into our discussion today, which is intuitive eating and anti-diet nutrition for athletes. So I'm sure many of my listeners already have a good sense of what intuitive eating is, especially if they've listened to one of my very first podcast episodes with Heather Kaplan, another dietitian. I think it was episode 2. But just in case, can you briefly describe what intuitive eating is, also what it isn't? Perhaps that's an important piece as well, and how you define anti-diet nutrition.
Yeah, absolutely. So intuitive eating, it's an anti-diet approach to nutrition and health. And it is a book, so written by 2 registered dietitians. The first book came out in 1995, and now they're on their 4th edition. So it continues to be updated and, with additional research and client studies and just keeping up to date with all of the new information. And it really focuses on like someone making peace with food and with their body. So healing their relationship with food. It is a weight neutral approach to food and nutrition and health. Like we don't have to lose weight in order to improve our health or to change our nutrition. It's just getting back in tune with like listening to our body rather than outsourcing, to a diet that tells us we have to eat this at this time and eat these foods, not those foods. So it's really a very individualized experience and a journey. It is not a diet of any kind. So it has definitely been kind of co opted in the media, especially and on social media. It's not a diet. So if anybody is promoting like intuitive eating for weight loss, that is not what intuitive eating is and not what it was intended to be. And it's also not just like people think of it kind of as the hunger fullness diet, like only eat when hungry, stop when full. And it's just so much more nuanced than that, especially for athletes, which we'll get into, because like there's just so much more involved from the psychology piece, from the physiological aspect of like why we eat the foods we do and how everybody is so different. So anti-diet as a whole, really is going against the diet culture and the diet industry that's telling us we have to be really rigid and obsessed and like, be striving for weight loss, regardless of how much that impacts our life in a negative way. So anti-diet really promotes food freedom and supports individual autonomy. So people being able to choose their cultural foods, the foods that they like, the foods they have available that they can afford, the foods that feel good in their body. So really getting back to those internal signals, what our body is telling us and what feels good for us as an individual versus those rigid external, diet rules.
Thank you for that. And you started to touch a little bit on this, but I mean, how do those definitions change, if at all, when applied specifically to the athlete population? Where, and again, this is going to be our broader discussion, but I mean, within the athlete population, when we're talking about sports nutrition, there are so many rigid guidelines, and yes, they do need to be applied and individually. But I'm just curious how we can change that definition to include athletes.
Yeah, I think in several ways. And one is that it's really a mind body connection. And so that means that it is, intuitive eating is listening to our body. Like, am I hungry right now? What sounds good? What would taste good? What would feel good? All of those components. But then it's also using our mind or our knowledge to be like, maybe I'm not hungry right when I wake up in the morning, but I know if I skip breakfast, like I'm going to be hangry by the time lunch comes around. And then, I'm not going to make good choices because I just want whatever's quick and easy and, all those different things. So it's like using our knowledge, which I think is a big piece of it for athletes, to be like, maybe I'm not, wanting to get up at 3 a.m. to eat a pre-race breakfast, before my marathon, but I know that that's what I need to do in order to fuel my body. So it's like using that combination of like listening to my body, but also what do I need in order to like feel my best and perform my best and recover well after a workout. And so I think that's the piece that often maybe gets missed or, maybe doesn't get applied enough for athletes is like, okay, after a hard workout, maybe I don't feel hungry, because I just exhausted myself and like my stomach isn't feeling like I want to eat something right now, but like I know that I need something for recovery. So I'm going to make sure to get something, even if I'm just drinking a smoothie or I'm eating something small to get that recovery process started. So it's not just eat when hungry and stop when full, especially when it comes to athletes, because a lot of times that does lead to underfueling.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to cover underfueling and red S and all of that in a little bit. But I think that's where I agree. It's where a lot of people get into trouble because they think, well, I feel like I'm eating enough. I'm not hungry. Like, how can I be underfueling? I'm eating so much, And it's like, well, actually, no, it's not enough because we're having all these other issues. So I think that's a really tricky area, and certainly one of my goals of our discussion today is to kind of help clarify some of that. But before we get there, I wanna address the role of weight and body composition. I've spoken with many athlete and sports dietitian podcast guests about both weight and body composition, how it plays a role in athletic performance, and especially in sports like running, cycling, triathlon, rock climbing, all of those things we think about, power to weight ratio, all that kind of stuff. And we often see too much emphasis placed on weight and body comp to achieve a certain level of performance, and sometimes that's leading to more harm than good. But equally, we have discussed in previous episodes on this podcast, recreational versus professional athletes. So like, that is another kind of way to think about it. Like, should the recreational athlete really be focusing on this at all when it's not how they make their living? And I think it's a really tricky topic. And I think that last question is particularly hard because I know many of my clients are not professionals, but they're really competitive, talented athletes, and they devote a lot of time and energy to their sport, and they have really big goals. So we don't really be like dismissive and be like, oh, it doesn't matter. You're not making your living this way. So I think it's just a really hard topic. And I would love to hear, from an intuitive eating standpoint, how do we address all of this? How do we guide the competitive but recreational athletes who really they want to do everything they can to perform their best, but we want to also take into account like how important are these things truly?
Yeah, I think it is very complicated and it's very individualized, and that's part of it is like, even if I'm not necessarily going to help, a client lose weight, because I am more concerned with like fueling their body properly and seeing where their weight falls. Like, it's still up to them. It's their body, their choice if they want to try and pursue weight loss. And I might give them some tips around like, okay, if you're training to like PR in this race, that's probably not the best time to be trying to lose weight because those are two different, competing goals. And so really just helping them to focus more on like fueling their body properly. Like, how does that align with your current goals? Because if we are trying to like be our best long term, under fueling, even if it's just by a little bit, it's like with the intention of I'm going to cut back to lose weight, like long term, that can lead to injuries and to lead to not being able to do their sport and feel their best, years down the line. So it's really looking at like, is it worth it right now to like try and lose weight because you think that it might help you in this race that's coming up in a few months? Or do we want to think about like long term? Do you just love the sport and want to be able to fuel your body properly so that you're healthy and that you can maintain the sport and have the energy that you need? And so, really, it always comes down to like fueling your body properly is the number one goal, especially for me as a sports dietitian. Like, I just can't, guide someone to intentionally underfuel their body. I think it's so much more important to be well fueled and to really be intentional about that pre, during, and post workout fueling, regardless of what happens to their weight. Because someone who's underfueled in order to like lose weight or be smaller typically is not going to perform as well as someone who is well fueled, even if that person is bigger.
I agree 100%, and I do the same with my athletes. I think the area where maybe I'm more I'm asking about is like in the off season. Let's say someone is not, because I'm definitely very clear with my clients. Like, I will not work on weight loss and this kind of stuff with you during a training cycle. It's not appropriate. We have to focus on fueling. But what about when it's not imminent? They have an event many months away. Way in the like later in the summer or something, and they're trying to get into better shape and improve their body composition or do whatever. Is that something that you ever work on with your athletes, or is that something you don't from, within intuitive eating?
Yeah, I mean, I do. Again, I try to stay away from like helping someone just lose weight for like the
Yeah.
sake of losing weight. But it's more like a lot of times, since underfueling is so common and so chronic, that a lot of times people's body composition can change just by fueling properly. If
Yeah.
they're under fueling and they're like, but I want to lose weight and you're telling me I need to eat more. And I'm like, let's fuel your body properly and really focus on like recovery and getting the most out of your workouts and seeing how your body reacts, because everybody's body is different, and it's going to respond differently. So it's just not the age old, idea of like eat less, exercise more. Like that's still what a lot of people believe they need to do in order to lose weight. And so sometimes it's just helping them to change that mindset of fueling your body properly. Like you might get stronger, you might build more muscle, like you might lean out, and maybe that's going to help you reach your goals. And then also just, diving further into like what's your past body weight and composition been like what's your diet history, how has your body responded in the past if you've tried to lose weight, like what's your motivation for this, like some of those pieces as well.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think that's, I know for my clients, it's really, really hard to convince people to eat more. And, I keep telling people, like, they don't understand the concept of, no, you have to eat, like, even if they're trying to lose weight or not, whatever. Maybe some people are just trying not to gain weight, but they're like, eat more. Like, I don't understand. And I have people sometimes get, the metabolic testing to show them just how much their RMR is, especially when they're consuming like a frighteningly low amount of food. And they just have just trouble grasping this concept of eating more. Maybe we should actually spend a second on that. This whole idea of eating more to lead to improved fitness and body changes. I mean, maybe it's as simple as, if you have more fuel on board, you can perform better, you can do more, you can get more fitness adaptations, perhaps build more lean body mass, as you said, lean out as a result of that. Is there anything more that you would add to kind of deepen that discussion a bit more?
Yeah,
Help convince people to eat more.
yeah, I think it's just small changes definitely can be, the place to start. I'm like, not, we have to add in like 3 extra meals today, but maybe we start by having a little something before your workout, and seeing how that feels. Like sometimes those small changes can feel a little more palatable to people that are afraid of that, but it's also having that discussion around like the bigger picture of, where did this number, if someone's counting calories, where did that number come from? A lot of times they're like, I don't know, like I got it off the internet or I just heard someone mention it. Like it's not even coming from like a legit place, they just have this number in mind. And I'm like, let's like figure it out for you, what actually is true and what actually is going to feel good. Because again, just so many females in particular, like we've just been conditioned to eat so little or to like think that we need so little that like just everybody's so underfueled that adding just a little bit, especially carbohydrates, especially if someone's active, can make a big difference in how they feel. And so sometimes just feeling that change can kind of spark in people like, oh, okay, maybe this does make a difference. I had a client that like by the end of the day, she was so exhausted. She was like crying and was like, I don't want to fix dinner. Like I can't even deal with my kids. And I'm like, you're barely eating any carbohydrates during the day, once we looked at what she was eating. And she was very afraid of them. And she was open to adding in just a little bit. But even just the little bit that she first added in, she was like, oh my gosh, like I feel the difference. So a little bit, especially carbohydrates, can go a long way in helping them to feel different, which can then help to kind of shift that mindset to maybe this does have an impact on how I'm feeling or how I'm performing.
Yeah. And the whole topic, I was going to save underfueling for later, but I feel like we keep like being drawn to there. So I feel like we need to discuss this now. So let's just tackle this whole topic now. We'll address some of my other questions later. But this whole topic of underfueling, and then of course, what is the consequence of chronic underfueling, red S, which I've talked with, about some on my podcast, but it's interesting to kind of hear about underfueling and red S, particularly from the intuitive eating umbrella. And I see so many clients, and I do feel just in talking with other sports dietitians that it's like the most common thing, getting clients in who are seriously underfueling relative to their training load, but like they fall into different categories. So like, I feel like you have the people who there's some sort of disordered eating or maybe history of eating disorder, or there's some sort of complicated relationship with food and body that they really truly believe like they shouldn't be eating more than what they are, or kind of what the client you were just describing, right? Like that I would think probably falls in that category, like carbs are bad, that kind of that camp, right? And then you have some who are cutting back because they just are so latched on to this whole weight body comp thing, like, oh, I'm a cyclist and my power to weight ratio has to be improved, blah blah blah, right? So you have that's like its own form of something, and they're kind of, it's still in that intentional camp, right? And then as we were talking about offline, there's the unintentional. There are the people who are like, they don't want to be eating too little. It's a very much an unintentional thing, and it could either be because their energy demands are just so high and they're struggling to get enough in, or because they just really don't have a firm grasp on how much they need to eat. Or maybe, or they're just like having trouble matching it up, right? So I think underfueling comes in so many different forms, and it's a term that's thrown around a lot. And so I think it would be helpful for us to kind of explore these different areas in whatever way you think would be helpful, and maybe we take it one at a time. But it's just such a common struggle, and I know I see people that fall in all these different categories. I think it's a really common one for me to see someone who they think they're eating enough. Maybe they have a history of disordered eating or eating disorder, but it's kind of like behind them, and now they're really trying hard. They're like, I want to eat more. I think I'm eating enough. I don't feel hungry, like it's just such a common struggle. So I know this is an area you're really passionate about. So again, how do you think we should frame this discussion? What would be like a helpful way to help the audience kind of try to avoid chronic underfueling and eventually red S from the intuitive eating standpoint? What do you I know this is like a big kind of unstructured question, but it's just such a big topic. I'm trying to think about how best to address it.
Yeah. I mean, it is. It's both intentional underfueling, someone who is trying to just cut back or quote unquote be healthier or, whatever, trying to lose weights. Like it can be very innocent. It can be very like, I'm trying to do the right thing. And then it can also be intentional of like, I'm trying, or be unintentional where someone is just busy, during the day, if they work during the day and they're like, oh, I don't even like feel hungry during the day because I'm so busy. I just don't notice it. Or maybe they're so chronically underfueled that their body has stopped giving those hunger signals. They don't notice it until they're just ravenous. And so there's so many different ways that it can happen. So also looking at, the kind of the history, what's led us to this point. Like, is it more fear of these foods? Is it just not knowing? Is it not being, planned in advance, like not having food available? How can we work on that? Again, it always goes back to like those small changes, those goals, like what's one thing we can focus on today or this week. And then it's also like maybe working with a sports dietitian, even if it's just 1 or 2 sessions. If you're like, I think I'm eating enough, but like, what if I'm not? Just having that outside expert opinion, looking at like, what are you eating in a day? Like, how is your energy level? How's your mood? How's your sleep and, stress and your performance, and how much are you working out? And just helping to like see, like, I'll calculate numbers for someone, like from a calorie and a macro standpoint. I don't always share those numbers, but it helps to guide me in like seeing, are they eating enough, compared to how they feel versus like what the science says that they should be eating for their activity level. And then like, okay, if we make a couple of changes, like how does that feel? Does it feel like too much? Does it feel like not enough? Like so many different pieces of it, because so many people are just trying to rely on, if I'm eating breakfast, lunch, and dinner, or if I'm eating at these certain times, or if I'm eating when I'm hungry, then that should be enough. But especially for athletes, a lot of times, like either we don't notice hunger, we're not able to actually listen to it, and feed our body when we feel hungry, or like we need to be intentional about adding stuff in, even if we don't feel physically hungry, in order to support the amount of exercise that we're doing, the amount of calories that we're expending. Because again, I just think it's so common, like how much we need in order to like fuel our body, even if we're not exercising, is even more usually than most people think that they should be eating, even though they're exercising, 4 or 5, 6 times a week. And so I'm like, we have this disconnect, I think, from all of the quote unquote obesity epidemic and this fear of gaining weight and, getting bigger, that now we're chronically underfueling. And I think that just wreaks so much more havoc on the body long term than it does if we're, eating quote unquote too much.
Yeah, and then of course add to the chronic underfueling, chronic stress, chronic sleep deprivation, like everything else. Which, and then when we're trying to identify signs of underfueling and, later red S, it's like everything's so tangled together. So, is the fatigue from this? Is it from that? So it's just, there's a lot of overlap and it's very tricky. A question for you. So you mentioned that you calculate like macros, energy needs out, but you don't share them. Would you say that that's kind of in line with more of an intuitive eating approach, or is that just something you were doing anyways?
A little bit of both. I mean, it definitely depends on the client. If it is someone who is like coming to me for sports nutrition and it is more of the case of like, I just don't know how to fuel my body, like maybe I'll share the numbers. If someone has a history of disordered eating or chronic dieting, or they get very like obsessed with the numbers, I won't always share. It also depends if they're tracking, if they have any history of tracking, or they plan to track. Like so often, people want me to give them numbers and I'm like,
Yeah.
and they're like, no, I never have. And I'm like, then what good is the number going to do you? Like, it's not going to serve any purpose, but sometimes also I like to use it for like kind of the shock factor of like, this is how much you need to be eating, especially if they share with me, that they're trying to eat very low calorie. I'm like, this is actually how much you need to be eating. And they'll be like, what? Like, oh my gosh, that's so much. And so sometimes, I just use it more as like, this is the minimum that like the science and, my experience says that you need. You might need more than that. Some days you might need less. Like it's very day-to-day fluctuations are completely normal. But like, let's start there and then see how you feel, rather than being like, this is the most that you can eat. Like, don't go over these numbers. That's very diet mentality. Like I'll use it as like, these are your minimums. I want you to get at least this, and then we'll base off how you feel.
And how are you calculating out energy needs? Are you using like an equation, or what methods are you using?
Yes. So I do. I mean, I use Mifflin St. Jour, and then it's kind of just from experience. Like I kind of like, like this is the minimum like grams per kilogram I want this person to have for like each, macronutrient. And then I kind of play around with it based on like, activity level, but also like, okay, this doesn't really make sense. Like I would probably want them to eat more of this. Like it's really hard to like explain. I've had interns be like, tell me exactly how you do it. And I'm like, use the science, but it's mostly just experience, like I know that I don't want them to go below this. Like that doesn't make sense. But then some of the science, especially around sports nutrition, like carb loading before a big break.
Gosh, it's
I'm
so
like,
high.
okay, yeah, I'm like, well, that doesn't really make sense for most people because that's going to be too much, So it's like balancing the like science and the data with like actual experience and what makes sense for this individual.
Yeah, because isn't carb loading, it's like 10 to 12 grams per kilogram, right? Or something along
Yeah.
those lines for, was it 24
Yeah.
to 36 hours or whatever it was. Yeah, I mean, I give those numbers to people sometimes just for fun. I don't actually tell them to do that, but I'm like, just so you know, because they're like, that's so many carbohydrates. I'm like, oh no, but do you know what the guidelines say?
Yeah.
No one does.
No, I'll
I don't
too. Yeah.
I don't know how, I mean, I know how people could get it in, but like, yeah, no. That's even, I mean, even the daily carbohydrates, like if you're doing like the 5 to 7 gram per kilogram, people, I give those numbers to people and they're just like, that's really a lot. How do I get that much volume of food in my body? And, we talk about it and then we adjust it and everything. But yeah, it is hard kind of balancing those things. That's why I'm always curious what other dietitians are doing and how they kind of balance like the guidelines and the science based on, things they're doing in reality. And
Yeah, that's what I
the
kind of
sense.
do. I'm like, I'll give
Yeah.
the science, like, especially if it's like to a group or even to the individual, like, here's what the science says. And then, like, here's maybe some practical tips, with like carb loading or, really like having the science like in my pocket, but then having like, what are you doing currently? And like, where's the biggest difference between like what you're doing and what the science says, and then start to like increase that one thing. And most of the time we're not going to get up to the 10 to 12 grams per kilogram. Like if we increase a little bit, like that's great, that's better than nothing. So always trying to meet someone where they're at and making changes based on what they're already doing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Carb loading is a really tough one because then you don't want people to just like suddenly be like completely overloading their body and then feeling sick from that and not feeling good for the race. But you want to be getting enough carbs in, so it's a tricky balance. Yeah, so I just totally lost my train of thought. I was gonna ask you a question. Oh yeah, I know what I was gonna say. For you mentioned Mifflin St. Jean, can you just briefly describe what that is for people who are not dietitians?
It's just one of the many equations that are available to use, to calculate someone's energy needs based on age, sex, height, weight, activity level. So just putting all those different factors in, and then it tells you like how many calories they need if they're sedentary. So their BMR, which I like to give that number to people, especially if that number is higher than what they're trying
They're
to
consuming. Yeah.
right? I'm like, if you're on bed rest, like this is how many calories you need.
Yeah.
And then like it'll show, okay, if you're sedentary, so no intentional exercise, like this is how much you need. And then I'll be like, but you are doing this much exercise. So this is how much you actually need, and just sometimes having that information can start to help people to kind of reframe and start to think about it differently.
Do you ever get like or have people do metabolic testing in your practice or no?
Very rarely. I've had, a few people with like some of the sports teams, like
Yeah.
they've done more like body composition. So then we have like the muscle mass, we can use to calculate, but very rarely do I have someone that's done like the actual metabolic testing, like testing BMR and that sort of stuff.
Got it. Okay. Is there anything else that you wanted to talk about in this area of underfueling or maybe even red S, if you want to get into that discussion at all, based on kind of the things you see in your private practice or things that you think would be really important to kind of broadcast to my listeners?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think just from an underfueling and red S standpoint, how common it is and like helping people to see all of the different potential symptoms. Like it's not just weight. Like I think so many people are like, well, I can't be underfueling because I'm not losing weight, right? If I was underfueling, when did I be losing weight? Like my weight has stayed the same or I've even gained weight. People then think like I'm eating too much and it just kind of perpetuates this idea of eating too little. So helping people to see like how the body just really has some strong mechanisms in place to prevent under fueling in terms of like how the body adapts when it's not getting enough nutrition coming in. So it's not just total calories then. Maybe, from an athlete standpoint, someone might be meeting their calorie needs, but maybe they're still just way underfueled on carbohydrates. Maybe they have this fear of carbs. And so most of their calories are coming from protein and fat. And so they're still not having the energy or the mental focus or like seeing the progression in their workouts that they want to see. So helping people to see, like changes in menstrual cycle for females is a huge red flag that they're underfueling. It's not just, feeling hungry or like helping people to see the signs of hunger is not just like my stomach growling, but it can be like, my mental focus isn't there. I have brain fog, like I feel cold a lot. It's like my hair is getting brittle or is falling out. It's like just so many other symptoms, like how it can really affect every system in the body and like how much more harm it's doing to be underfueling, especially long term. than if you were eating quote unquote too much. So just really helping people see like every system in the body requires energy. And if there's not enough energy coming in, the body has to decide what systems get energy and what doesn't. When really we want everything to be optimally fueled, so that everything can work properly.
Yeah, definitely. And REDS stands for Relative Energy Deficiency in Sport, in case anyone wasn't familiar with that. And it's basically like what chronic underfueling will lead to. Okay, awesome. Thank you for that. Okay, so we can always come back to the underfueling question or topic, but I think it'd be really valuable to talk about, kind of shifting gears here, talk about your time as the team dietitian for the NFL Tennessee Titans. I actually haven't had a dietitian on yet, working in kind of more of the professional sports team dynamic, like with the NFL or NBA or anything like that. So I'd love to hear about the types of things you do, or you did day to day, and the challenges you faced, as an anti-dietitian working within a sport that really still heavily emphasizes weight and body composition, and whatever else you think would be relevant to this discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely, from the weight and body composition standpoint, it was challenging as an dietitian. And people would ask, do you use intuitive eating with these type of athletes? And I'm like, yes, I do, but maybe I don't call it intuitive eating, or I'm not using, the verbiage from like the book and the principles. But like I'm talking about, like, how does your body feel? Do you feel hungry right now? Like, do you feel like eating a big meal? Like, would it feel okay to eat something before this practice? Like, I'm, using a lot of the same ideas, just maybe wording it differently when working with athletes. And so it was very challenging, especially when I would see like an athlete struggling to meet, their weight goal, and knowing that like that weight goal is kind of just pulled out of thin air, really. Like, I mean, it's based on like their weight history and like, pulling data from like other athletes in their position, like what's the average weight, but like it's not really specific to that individual. And so sometimes like it wouldn't make sense, where I'm like, I see this athlete trying really hard, like not fueling properly because he's trying to lose like 2 pounds. And I'm like, this doesn't make sense. Like, I would rather him be 2 pounds heavier and well fueled. That's what's best for his health and his performance, which is what's best for the team. And so I would go to bat for athletes that were really struggling to meet their weight goal. And I'd be like, this doesn't make sense. Like, I've been working with him, I've been seeing what he's doing. Like, his body just does not want to go down to that weight. Like, it's better for his performance, better for the team to increase that weight goal. And oftentimes they would. So I really did that aspect of it. I would rather not have so much emphasis on weight, especially when I would see the guys that did struggle to make those weight goals every week, just the kind of yo-yo dieting and cycling where they would really try to decrease what they were eating leading up to those weekly weigh-ins. And then, just doing that every week. Like, I would rather them be well fueled 7 days out of the week. So that was definitely challenging. And I do think there's a long way to go in team sports, and especially in, that kind of level of not having so much emphasis on weight and body composition, but more on like being well fueled and more on, are they getting stronger? Are they getting faster? Like injury reports, like how often are people getting injured? Maybe that's a sign that like we're not fueling properly. So many of those other factors that, all of my athletes and all of my clients should really be focusing on before just that one specific number on the scale. So really my work with them, it depended on the season. We actually started out not even having like an in-house kitchen or chef or food service provider. We were using a catering company. So like the food was coming from an outside catering company. So I would really work with them to talk about what I wanted, brought in, to make sure that we were getting all the food groups, to make sure that we were fueling the guys properly. So we would serve them like every meal and snack throughout the day. By the end of my time there, we had built a brand new kitchen. So we had a full in-house staff, chefs and food service providers. And that was amazing. So being able to accommodate like food preferences, if anybody had any food allergies, and then really working on that pre, during, and post workout. So practice, games. So focusing on like, that's one of the things that I talk about, with intuitive eating for athletes. I'm like, okay, every meal isn't going to be super enjoyable. Like we served, plain pasta with like marinara sauce and like grilled chicken, right? That was like the go-to before practice. I'm like, yeah, you don't want to eat that every day. Maybe that's not what's good right now, but like that's what fuels your body for this workout, and then we would make like post-practice shakes and have meals that, you know, focused on, do we have carbohydrates? Do we have proteins? Do we have stuff to kind of accommodate everybody, since it is such a big team and everybody has such different needs? So really just helping everybody to, get what they needed throughout the day, because it really was a full-time job for them. They're there most of the day getting their meals and their snacks. And so just especially helping them stay fueled during the season to kind of keep some interest and some variety going in the food. So like meeting their physical needs, but then also like, okay, maybe on, this day we serve something a little bit more exciting, even if it's not quote unquote the healthiest, just to make sure that they're eating and they're not getting bored with everything.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, that's something I certainly see all the time, is like balancing food as function and fuel as something that's enjoyable. And yes, in the ideal world, all the food you eat would be delicious and functional, right? But it's not always the case, because especially if we're dealing with, just lack of time or lack of things available, or this type of food sits well in my stomach. So if there's like GI issues, like, you don't want to always be doing the most exciting things or whatever. But yeah, it can get very tricky. And then of course with an NFL team, like millions and millions of dollars are on the line. So, you really want to be dialing all that in. So I can imagine that's a big task to kind of take that on.
Yeah,
I'm curious to hear. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
they have a lot of pressure, from outside sources of try this product or eat this certain way.
Yes.
Or, in the off season when they're away from our facility, like they're working with other trainers and strength coaches and different people that are like, you need to do this, you need to do this. So I think they have a lot of external pressure to like always be trying to find that like one thing that gives them an edge. And a lot of times, unfortunately, it was some sort of fad diet, so helping educate them on like, maybe that's not working the best for you, or maybe that's not going to support your goals long term.
Yeah, I can imagine there was a lot you had to like unpack and and kind of take down there. What about, the athletes? You talk about athletes who are trying to make weight in terms of losing weight. What about in terms of gaining weight? Because I imagine that's a huge piece of what you were doing in the NFL as well. So kind of what strategies you're using and anything else you think would be interesting there.
Yeah. So definitely during my time, with the Titans, most of the players did struggle. Like it wasn't weight loss. It was most of them were trying to maintain or gain weight. Just the amount of activity they were doing, especially in season, just like slowly losing weight again, because like they're maybe just eating when they're hungry, rather than like eating enough to meet their energy needs. And so really anybody trying to gain weight, like, I feel better about helping them do that, because I know it's not as harmful as like underfueling in order to lose weight, is like just helping them to find anywhere that we can add a little bit more. Maybe it's more high calorie foods, like, foods from the fat, excuse me, from the fat food group. So more nuts and seeds and peanut butter and avocados and cheese. Maybe it's eating more often, really being intentional about eating something every 2 to 3 hours, or drinking things with calories, just any way that we can add a little something, and then really being consistent. Like I would have guys that, they're like, oh, Monday through Thursday, I'm really good. And then I just kind of, do whatever over the weekend. That was usually in the off season. And I'd be like, that's almost 50% of the time that you're not being consistent. It makes sense that you're not able to gain weight, or that you're losing weight unintentionally. Like we have to be really consistent with getting all of our meals and snacks. Like one of the guys, I joke to the college football players that I work with now, that complain that they can't eat anymore, that they're full, that they don't feel hungry. And I'm like, well, one of the NFL players that I worked with, his motto was eat until it hurts and then eat some more. So I'm like, it's not pleasant and it's not enjoyable to like always be eating when you don't feel hungry or when you don't want to eat something. But maybe that's what you have to do, if you have these performance goals.
Yeah, and to translate that to kind of like circling back to more of like the runner who, let's say, thinks he's eating enough but truly isn't to match the training that he's doing, and oh well, I'm not hungry. And so it's like, okay, it's not the same, obviously it's trying to gain weight and you're in the NFL, whatever, but still kind of finding opportunities to eat more and then kind of seeing, well, what are the effects of that? Do I feel better? Do I perform better? Do I recover better? Right. But it's tricky. It's really tricky, this whole thing. So I thought it would be fun, and we talked a little bit about this offline, so this will be a little ad lib here, but I thought it'd be fun for us to go through a hypothetical athlete client. So basically a fake case study and maybe combining the common things that we see in clients, and we can come up with more than one if we feel like that's a fun thing to do, but things that we see often and how we would kind of tackle it, I guess. And we could both take a stab, I suppose. But I really want to hear from you since I'm having on my show. and you have the intuitive eating standpoint, which, by the way, more and more I like learn. I mean, I've been learning about intuitive eating for a long time, but I'm not a certified intuitive eating counselor, but I would say that most of what I do falls in that camp, just as an FYI. Because everything I hear about people, like I've had you on, I've had Heather on, and so much of what I do really, I've just agreed 100% with what you do. So it's just interesting to hear. But anywho, so I'm going to come up with a hypothetical client. Let's say a female runner in her mid-40s, training for a marathon. Her training's been going okay, but she's experiencing some fatigue. She has some GI stuff going on during harder runs. She has to have a bowel movement like during a run or at the end, or just, has some GI discomfort. She's just feeling confused what to eat, no disordered eating. She's also a working parent. She's super busy life, 2 young kids. So in other words, many other reasons to be tired. No dietary restrictions. No significant medical history, although she has a really hard time keeping her ferritin up and has been taking iron for quite some time. Not sure what other details we want to throw in there. Where would you start with a client like this? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, any of my clients, I do kind of a deep dive into like previous experiences. Like, is this her first marathon? When did she start running? What has been kind of her mileage, previously? Like, is this a big jump from where she usually is? Looking at that pre, during, and post fueling in terms of, the training just being okay and feeling fatigue and some GI stuff. Like, that's going to maybe be the starting point, is like, are you eating something before? What is that? How does that feel? If you change that up, how does that impact your GI stuff during the runs? Like, is it more, what you're taking in during the run? Like, maybe we need to switch up the type of fuel using like a different source of gel or something more solid, kind of playing with some of those different fueling aspects of it. Looking at overall patterns of eating in terms of her feeling like confused about what to eat. Breakfast is a big one, especially if she's busy and has young kids. Probably the mornings are pretty hectic. Are you eating a full, complete breakfast? Are you eating snacks in between meals? What's your timing with the pre and post? Like, are you having a snack before a workout? Are you recovering after? Like, how's your sleep? I would definitely want to see any current blood work if she is low on ferritin. Personally, I'm struggling with that. My ferritin was very low, and I've been supplementing for 8 months, and I found out
Me too.
it only got 2 points in 8 months, and I was so mad. But knowing how much that affects your energy level, and so just looking at all those different things, even hydration or electrolytes, or where does she live? What's the weather like? Is she running outside? Is it hot? Is it humid? Is it cold? What time of year is this? So many different things to start with.
Yeah, no, for sure. And Actually, one thing we didn't talk about in terms of underfueling, and this reminded me, GI stuff, GI issues. Can we talk briefly about GI issues as they relate to underfueling?
Yeah. So, I mean, the GI system is, a huge system that uses a lot of different organs and uses a lot of energy. And so, if someone is not eating enough, a lot of times GI stuff can show up, but especially if they're trying to add something back in, right? And then that makes them feel like, oh, see, like that makes my GI stuff worse. So I shouldn't be eating more or I shouldn't be adding these foods back in when really it's
Mm,
like the system just kind of shut down and now it's like you have to slowly increase or slowly retrain it to be working properly. So like if someone cut out all dairy or all carbohydrates, like adding those back in might not feel great at first, just like if a vegan suddenly started eating meat, like your body has to readjust to that and get those enzymes working again and get used to kind of working properly. And so underfueling can cause a lot of, especially like constipation, bloating, gas, for some people, diarrhea or acid reflux, lots of different issues. And a lot of times, unfortunately, people use that as more of a reason to restrict further, to
yeah.
cut more things out because they're like, something's bothering my stomach. Maybe I need to cut more things out when really it's just that they're underfueling. And if they slowly start to increase, like those GI symptoms will usually, get better over time, hopefully.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you encounter someone who is not eating enough and they're having some kind of somewhat chronic GI issues, then your first line of I mean, other than kind of ruling out medical issues, obviously, is just increasing. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, we'll definitely
Slowly.
look if there's any, maybe we'll do a food journal to see if there
Mm,
are triggers, if there's any patterns, any like certain times of day. Does it get worse as the day goes
yeah,
on? Or, all different things. GI issues are so complicated.
they're so
It's
hard.
like trial and error. But
Yeah.
definitely if someone's like under fueling and they're like, yeah, I have GI issues. I'm like, well, yeah, that makes sense. That's probably, under fueling is probably, if not the reason, then one of the reasons that that's happening.
Yeah, no, I've had a number of a lot of clients who, because I mean, obviously GI stuff is so common, especially in endurance sport. But I've had a number of clients come to me, and GI issues are part of the reason why they come to me. And sometimes it's pretty straightforward, and we kind of figure it out. And sometimes it's so hard to figure out what's going on. I have one client, and we're just like both like banging our head against the wall trying to figure out what's happening. Um, but but yeah,
Yeah.
underfueling certainly is one reason for sure. What about let's talk about ferritin or just iron status for a moment because that's definitely something that's been on my mind, and it sounds like yours as well with your ferritin. And it's a common one. We see a lot of athletes coming in with, especially women coming in with, not the greatest iron status. Maybe their B12 is also low. Maybe they have other issues, but yeah, let's talk about iron and because I think too often we see, oh, we'll just supplement, but really that's kind of like a band-aid. So what else we could do in order to get to the root cause of the issue?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think one of the issues is that it's not regularly tested. You
Yeah.
know, vitamins and minerals are not part of like the blood panel that most people get at their yearly physical or when they go to the doctor. So most
Yeah.
people don't know that something might be low, and so I think iron can be very common, especially for women, especially for runners. So, if someone like for the first time that I knew that my iron was low was when I was in grad school and I just stopped eating meat because I was living on my own for the first time and I just didn't cook meat and I didn't replace it with anything. And so like my iron got very low and I was like, oh yeah, that makes sense. But then I don't think I had it tested again until just last year. And I was like, like energy's been low. I'm kind of struggling. Like, what could it be? And so I had my, asked to have the iron tested. And then even just supplementing, like I was supplementing for 8 months and it only went up 2 points. And so,
Mm,
the idea that like, okay, if we just supplement, we'll be fine. And so figured out like maybe that's not the right supplement for me. Maybe I need a higher dosage. Like, what else can I do here? And then also looking at just the impact that ferritin has on energy level. I mean, I have noticed a difference. I did switch supplements and I have noticed a difference in energy. I don't know that I'm, quite optimal, but I do hope that it's increasing a little bit. And then I think that's the other piece is like the quote unquote normal range for ferritin is like a huge range.
Yes.
It's,
Yeah. It's
I think
not,
like,
I literally just got off the phone with a potential new client right before this recording and she has low ferritin and low B12, and her doctor was like, "Oh, your ferritin's it used to be 5, but your ferritin's 18 now. You're great." And I'm like,
yeah.
"No, she's an ultra runner. She's not great." Like,
Yes,
what the
so
heck?
the difference between like it being quote unquote normal versus it being optimal,
Yeah.
and so that I think is important because the range, I think the normal range for ferritin is like 15 to like 150. Like it's a
I
huge
know.
range. And
It's
so yeah,
insane.
someone being at 18 is quote unquote normal, but like is that optimal? How are they feeling? Like could it be higher? Could they feel better if it was 30 or if it was 50? What do we need to do to get them there? So I think, yeah, there's a lot of issues around just being able to even get tested and see where those numbers are, and then figuring out like supplements, food sources, getting retested to see how those are affecting you, not just assuming that, okay, I'm taking the supplement, so it must be working, because I found that out myself. It was not working.
Which supplement which one were you taking and which one did you switch to, out of curiosity?
I was taking, it's called Proferin. It's supposed to be just better absorbed, supposed to be like not cause GI issues. And yeah, after 8 months, my ferritin went from 5 to 7. So now I am taking, what did I get? Thorn, THORNE.
Yep.
Iron.
Bisglycinate?
Yeah, their iron supplement, and I take like 3 a day. So I'm
Mhm.
really trying to increase it, but it has caused some GI issues, as iron supplements can do. So kind of finding that balance between like getting my ferritin up there and then making sure that it's not affecting me too much in that way.
Yeah, no, I've been taking the Thorne ferrous bisglycinate for a while. I only took one, but then I switched to the Now Foods. They have like a double strength there. I think there's also a bisglycinate form, which is supposed to be easier on the digestive tract, and I haven't had issues. But yeah, it's one of those things where it's like, again, trying to figure out, well, we don't want to be supplementing forever. How can we prevent this from happening? Which is always really tricky. And I myself am trying to figure that out still for myself.
Yeah. I think it's important for people to know, like, if they are deficient in something, like if my ferritin was 5, which it was, like increasing iron foods is probably not going to get me to a sufficient level. Like you're most likely going to need a supplement. And then you can also, at the same time, or once you get it up, like start to think about what are some, food and lifestyle and behavior things that I can do to maintain it. But oftentimes, if we're deficient, we do need a supplement to get it up to a more normal standpoint.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. But we don't want to just be like forever taking
Yeah.
these supplements. We want to make some other changes as well. And just kind of going back to the normal ranges, B12 is another one. So this person I was talking to, I think her B12 was like 250. And it's like, again, that's not okay. And maybe there was an absorption thing going on. Maybe it was a dietary thing. Actually, it was, because she was, I think, a vegetarian. But in vitamin D, another one where you could be even within the normal range on the lower end, and that's not adequate. So, I think it's just knowing, number one, that if you're just going standard lab work done, and knowing if your provider, by the way, has any, experience working with athletes, and especially endurance athletes, if that's your thing, is really important, because then they'll recognize that, these values aren't adequate. And especially, if they themselves are an athlete, sometimes you'll get these great doctors who are also athletes, and they get it and they work with other athletes. And then other times you get doctors who are wonderful doctors, but they simply do not understand the needs of athletes. So not only do they not think to test for certain things like, say, ferritin or whatever else, but then they don't recognize that your values are not okay. So I think at that point, unfortunately, with our healthcare system and the way that it works as well, it's just, you just have to advocate for yourself and be aware of these things for yourself and ask for what you need. That's
Yeah.
at least what I tell my clients.
Yeah, and that's what I found too, because like I was frustrated when I went in to get retested. Like on one hand, I was glad that it hadn't gone up because I didn't feel any different.
Yeah.
On the other hand, I'd been supplementing for 8 months, so I thought there would be some change. And
Totally.
when they called to give me my results, they didn't say anything. They were just like, "Yeah, you're still anemic, so we'll retest you in 3 months." And I was like, "Well, clearly what I'm doing is working." But
Yeah.
recommendations. And so that's when I was like, well, I'm gonna, try something else on my own then and see what
Yeah.
happens.
My favorite, because I have genetic high cholesterol, and my favorite is like I like the doctor would get the results, and my cholesterol's actually okay now, but in the past when it's been slightly elevated, oh well, diet and exercise. I'm like, I'm a freaking dietitian runner. Like, hello, like, what do you think? Like, okay, I'm doing fine there. But yeah,
It's frustrating.
they don't really give you much
Very
guidance. It's very generic. But what do we expect? I mean, they're not really trained in nutrition, so all right. Is there anything else that we've forgotten or neglected or maybe didn't talk enough about that you think would be beneficial relating to kind of all this stuff we've been chatting about? Or do you think we've covered it for now?
I mean, yeah, there's always more that we can
I
talk
know.
about. I think we've covered a lot.
Is there anything that you want to talk about?
Yeah, I mean, really, it going back to like like you said, just the general recommendations that a healthcare provider gives on like diet and exercise, like how prevalent that is, especially if someone is in a bigger body, just the assumptions that are made. So finding a provider that's actually going to give you individual recommendations and not just like assume anything about your food and your exercise. And just finding providers that like are willing to look at the whole picture and like really work with you to figure out what's going on rather than just giving like this blanket, recommendations of eat less and move more or lose
Yes.
weight and all of your problems will magically go away. I think weight stigma, like treating people differently if they're in a different size body, is very prevalent, unfortunately, in our healthcare system.
Yeah, no, for sure. And that idea too, it like again, it's just so prevalent even in the athlete world. I mean, I have a client right now who very recreational, nothing super competitive, but she's doing like a longer bike ride, I don't know, 50, 60 miles, something like that. And, she was saying, well, obviously this will be a lot easier if I lose weight. So can you help me lose weight? What would you say to someone like that?
Yeah, it's funny. I had a similar situation where, a client was trying to get back into running. And she was like, this is so hard. It must be because of my weight. And I'm like, it sounds like it's hard because you haven't been running,
Yeah.
Running is going to be hard regardless of your size if you haven't been
Totally.
running. So, like, regardless of your size, just getting more endurance, more strength, like being well fueled is going to make it feel easier. Like, you don't necessarily have to lose weight in order for it to feel easier.
Yeah. It's really hard to convince people of that though.
It
Don't
is,
you
yeah.
find? Like it's just so hard. It's really
Absolutely.
hard.
And it's exhausting. Like being a
It's very
salmon
exhausting.
swimming upstream, we're still fighting against like the majority of people selling weight loss and selling diets. And I mean, we have like 100 years of research now that shows that diets don't work, and yet they're still like the most prescribed thing.
Yeah. Yep. No, for sure. And I know, I mean, my approach at least is just to do a full assessment of the client, and we still make improvements, we change things, we make sure that, the eating patterns are where we want them to be, that they're tuning into their body and all the various things, right? And that may or may not result in weight loss, is what I tell people. Like let's see what happens and how you feel. And equally I've had clients where, they make changes, their weight doesn't change, they're really frustrated, but they're performing better, they feel better. And they just are so hung up on this concept that they just can't get over it, and
Yeah.
it's not a battle that I always win, and it's really frustrating.
Yeah.
I've had a client who came in, I got her to eat more, she felt better. She's like, oh, I even feel like my clothes are looser. She weighed herself, she had gained weight, on that day, freaked out, ghosted me. Like I'm like, yep, that's happened too. So it's one of
hard.
these things. It's really tricky. And, I said to you offline, I kind of feel like I'm still straddling the line a little bit. I'd say I'm mostly in the intuitive eating kind of space with how I function, and occasionally I will step my toes or do a little work on kind of intentional weight loss and some stuff like that. It just doesn't feel good to me, and it's
Yeah.
something that I hate doing personally. Um, and I've toyed with the idea of just stopping doing it completely. It's hard when that's what a lot of clients want, to be quite honest, when you need to make a living, you know?
Yeah.
But yeah, I try to do my best to fight the good fight
Yeah.
and lead
It's so
people
hard.
away.
Like, like how over 100 factors like impact our weight. So that number on the scale, like it tells us so little. That doesn't just tell us that we've lost weight. Like that could just tell us our hydration status or, where we're at in our menstrual cycle or if we ate a lot of salt yesterday. Like there's
Yeah.
so many different factors that influence that number. And so it's like, why are we giving so much emphasis to this number?
And I think people also have this idea that it shouldn't be so hard, even if they themselves have experienced it as being hard. But it is actually really hard to lose weight with clients
It
sometimes.
is.
Even when I'm actually trying to do it with them, it can be really, really difficult. And especially when you're dealing with a real live human being who has a stressful life and isn't sleeping and all of the things that get in the way, it's really hard.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's something that is, as a dietitian at least, and I guess this is, of course, for any other dietitians listening, maybe you can relate, but it's something that I still struggle with. And I think even way back when I talked to Heather was something I was struggling with. So I feel like I've kind of come along on my journey, but it's always something that I think is good to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the body sees, intentional weight loss as a threat to survival. Like it just thinks there's not enough food available. And so the body's very smart and tries to prevent that as much as possible. But people have been sold this idea that you just eat less and move more and your weight should, go exactly where you want it to. And so it's really hard to not feel like it's a personal failure, which is what so many people do. And I'm like, no, like your body just doesn't want to go there and that's okay.
Yeah. Can you, if you feel like you can explain this, if not, no worries, but do you feel like you can explain why like, because this is what people have trouble understanding sometimes, why it is that you could be eating less and not losing weight, like eating so little that you're not losing weight or potentially even gaining some weight,
Mhm.
and how you sometimes can eat more and lose weight?
Yeah. The way that I describe it, and it's not super scientific,
That's
but
fine.
I describe it as, if we're eating too little, the body really holds on to everything that it has. And so it's using, our fat stores and it's holding on to everything. It decreases metabolism, so that we're not burning as many calories. Like it gets more efficient with the calories that are coming in, and so it's really hard to fight against that because for most people, like the body also increases cravings. And so for most people, we can't overcome that with willpower. Like people think that they can for maybe a short time, maybe, days, weeks, months, whatever. But eventually you give in and you eat. And then like that cycle repeats. Then you like feel guilty and you're like, oh, I need to eat less again. Like I'm out of control. Like it's just this whole vicious cycle. And so for most people, we can't overcome the body's like physiological desire to stay alive, which, requires food. So the ones that can, is when we get into eating disorders like anorexia, which is not what we want. If someone's trying to lose weight, we don't want it to go that far. Versus on the other end, if we're eating more, we can sometimes lose weight because our body then lets go of that. Like it increases metabolism, we're not having those strong cravings because we're adequately fueling ourselves, we're not having those mental battles around like, okay, I'm really trying not to eat this food or I'm thinking about this food. And like it's psychological and biological. Like there's so many different components that the body does to try and prevent us from losing weight intentionally. But if we're fueling our body properly and everything is working properly, our body is going to fall where it wants to be, which is not a specific number. It's a range, and it's also not necessarily the number that you want it to be or that society has told you that it should be.
Yes. Thank you for explaining that. That was awesome. And very much a lot of overlap with what I usually tell clients as well. But people have such a hard time grasping that. I don't know if you find that as well. They just don't understand, like, how could I possibly, like, eat more and potentially lose weight? Although I'm not saying eat more to lose weight, obviously. But, I'm just describing the various things that could or could not happen or may not happen.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jill. This has been a really fun conversation. This has been a little bit more all over the place compared to some of my more structured ones, but I really love conversations like this because we get to a lot of stuff and I get to know you a bit more and where you're coming from, which is really what these, dietitian discussions are all about. So thank you for your time today.
Absolutely.
Where can everyone find you online?
So I have a website, jillmerkelrd.com, and then my social media handles, I'm most on Instagram, although I have a love-hate relationship with it, especially lately. And it's still Jill RD. So definitely come and find me on there and reach out if anybody is interested.
Awesome. All right. We're going to wrap up with some quick bites questions. What is your favorite meal or snack when you're in a hurry?
Favorite snack in a hurry is definitely goldfish crackers.
What about when you're not in a hurry?
When I'm not in a hurry, I would take more time to make more of a balanced meal. I kind of do like the Chipotle bowl type stuff, with like some rice, some beans, some protein, some fats, like some cheese or some avocado. Not in a hurry for a snack. That's probably just going to be more like a yogurt or maybe an apple and peanut butter. Not too fancy on my snacks.
What's your favorite post-race meal or snack?
It started kind of becoming a tradition after half marathons that I like to go to Mellow Mushroom. It's a pizza place, and I get the Mighty Meaty. I think that started when I was first low on iron, and I didn't know it. I was craving meat when I happened to this pizza place, and I was like, I saw the Mighty Meaty, which is like every meat on a pizza. So now it's become my post-race meal after a half marathon.
How do you like your eggs cooked?
Scrambled.
What's your favorite beverage?
Pretty boring, but water.
Water. Hey, water's great. It's very underrated. What foods remind you of growing up? What are your comfort foods?
Definitely carbohydrate foods like mashed potatoes, mac and cheese. We always joke about Hardee's hot ham and cheese. We used to get that a lot when we were kids. I was a very picky eater when I was a kid, so I definitely think of like mashed potatoes, corn, and like chicken fingers.
Nice. What's your favorite ice cream flavor?
Ben and Jerry's, the Tonight Dough.
Nice. And last but not least, top 3 items of gear that are most essential to your active lifestyle.
Gotta have my running shoes. So I like Asics. I've been wearing those pretty much the whole time I've been running. Good running socks. I used to get blisters until I learned about good running socks, which I think my current ones are Features, I think is the brand. And then I would say my Apple AirPods, because I always listen to something, either music or a podcast while I'm running.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Jill. And I wish you the best of luck with the New York City Marathon. That will be an awesome experience for you. I'll be cheering for you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Have a good one.
You too. Bye.
And that wraps up episode 59 of the Eat for Endurance podcast. Thanks again, Jill, for coming on the show and having a great chat with me all about intuitive eating for athletes, underfueling, and much more. If you enjoyed the podcast and you'd like to support me and my ability to keep this podcast going, I would really appreciate it if you would take a few seconds out of your day and rate and review my show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you enjoy listening to your shows. And while you're at it, share it with your friends as well, family, whoever you think might want to listen. I would love to keep the show going, but that does mean I need to start growing my audience, and that is where you all come in. Thank you again for listening and hope you tune in next time.